1765, Captain James Cook observed Port Basque to have a small, snug but commodious inner harbour for fishing vessels, and an outer harbour sheltered from the wind and most convenient to accommodate men of war. As the name suggests, Basque whalers had been visiting the area long before Cook's historic survey. Today, Port Basque, with its ice-free harbour, is a major distribution centre and point of entry for most travellers by sea to the island of Newfoundland. Hello and welcome. My name is Dermot O'Reilly, and like many travellers who come to Newfoundland, my first port of entry was at the ferry terminal in Port Basque. I was with a travelling band at the time, so the main consideration was getting to St. John's, which was our first gig. That was 900 kilometres away, and they were miles back then, of course, but the journey was just as long. Since that time, I've had the opportunity to experience Newfoundland in all of its moods and beauty. I'd like to share some of that experience with you, and I'm inviting you to join me as I travel through the Newfoundland that has become my home. Trans-Canada Highway in Newfoundland could be described as a ragged semicircle as it winds its way across the island to St. John's. We're going to start on our journey now, stop in at a few places, visit some friends and hear some music. It's been almost 20 years now since I made my way across Newfoundland for the first time. Where I was going and what to expect were kind of hinted at by some people I met along the way and by the Newfoundland music I'd heard on the journey from Toronto to Port Basque. Having grown up in Ireland, the island of Newfoundland was a bit of a mystery to me on that first journey. But since then I've come to know about Newfoundland, her history and rich cultural heritage. Like the rest of the province, the majority of people who settled here on the west coast were attracted by the fishery. But there were other enticements. The 18th century saw the arrival of Mi'kmaq Indians from Nova Scotia, who carried on a brisk fur trade with the French. Also from Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, a group of French-speaking Acadians made their homes here, to be joined by Scottish Highlanders who made their way to Newfoundland via Cape Breton. It's not too far from Codroy here to Cape Breton, about 100 miles by sea. So many stories travelled there by way of the French, English and American traders in the early 1800s. The land was fertile in the Codroy Valley, they said, and it was there for the taking. So this information, coupled with the great scarcity of land in Cape Breton, led to a major influx of settlers here between about 1825 to 1845. The Gaelic-speaking settlers who came to the Codroy Valley area were an extension of the larger emigration from the western highlands of Scotland to Cape Breton. Whatever their reasons for leaving, they brought with them to Newfoundland their ancient language and social customs. The language has all but disappeared now, and many of the customs and social activities have been affected by time and technology. The milling frolic, where the hand-woven cloth was pre-shrunk as a communal activity, is rarely a cause for a gathering now, and many of the songs that were sung to supply the rhythm for the work at hand could also go the way of time and be lost.
In recent years, music isn't sort of homegrown anymore like it used to be, and if it's going to exist at all in today's world, it has to take on the newer forms. It has to be recorded, it has to be on record. I feel that a lot of the more traditional, the actual homegrown entertainment, the songs people sang just for their own enjoyment, and the tunes that were played for dances and that, a lot of that is in danger of just being lost and being forgotten about.
The land is still rich and fertile in the Codroy Valley, and the music continues to find new expression at the summer festivals and in the lively clubs. Newfoundland's French-speaking population is concentrated mostly in the Stephenville area and on the Port-au-Port Peninsula, which forms the north shore of St. George's Bay. Like the Codroy Valley, the Port-au-Port Peninsula was settled by people of diverse origins. English fishermen from the Channel Islands, Scottish farmers and fisherfolk from Cape Breton, and of course the French, the first settlers here, whose cultural roots are in evidence throughout the area.
Well, there's a long history, of course, to the French in and around the waters of Newfoundland, but the actual presence today on the west coast is really goes no further back than the 19th century. And when the French fishery resumed after 1815, there were a small number of bases along the so-called French shore. One of them was on Red Island. And it became, in the course of the 19th century, one of the more important ones, having maybe 130, 140 men working there at various times in the year. Many of the people who worked on the shore fishery weren't fishermen at all. They were farmers and peasants from the hinterland of the Saint Malo area, especially, who lived in Brittany at a time it was very poor, very hard to scrape a living from the soil, and many of them would go off to the fishery. Had a certain romantic aura about it, which appealed to them. They were soon to be disillusioned. Conditions were rigorous. it prompted a number of young lads to run away, and that's why they're known as deserters. And people will tell you, oh, my great-grandfather was a deserter. And they would settle then, hide on the peninsula until the fleet had gone, and eventually make themselves a little cabin and scratch a living as best they could. I don't think there were more than about 60 of them, but they formed the nucleus of the present-day French communities on the peninsula.
Along with the Acadian settlers and the French business people who traded in the St. George's Bay area, the adventurous young men from the fishing fleets and the men of war established a unique French culture on Newfoundland's west coast.
Well, I think the future holds a variety of possibilities. I think the most likely possibility, of course, is that the language will go on being strengthened, and a growing awareness of the value of tradition and culture will help promote that. What has grown up over the last 150 years on the Port-au-Port Peninsula primarily, as any culture that grows up in relative isolation, it's bound to develop distinctive features. And so while it shares a great deal with all other French cultures in North America, it does have a number of distinctive features which one hopes will prosper, and I think it will.
The first map to show Newfoundland in its correct shape was the work of Captain James Cook. His survey of Newfoundland's coastline is remembered not only in the documents, but in the names he bestowed on landmarks and bearings like Tweed and Guernsey, here in the picturesque Bay of Islands. At the time of his visit in 1765, Cook noted the presence of a thriving salmon fishery near what is today Brook at the head of Humber Arm. Brook evolved from a few random settlements around the early 1800s to a bustling city, the site of a world-class pulp and paper mill and the major distribution centre for northern, central and western Newfoundland. From a population of 100 loggers, trappers and fishermen, around 1867, Brook has grown to 50,000 people now.
Brook was established initially as a salmon post, very, very early. In fact, one of the great authors of Canadian history, a man called Harold Innes, mentions in his book about a family called Brake, B-R-A-K-E, many descendants still on the west coast, who settled in Brook in the 1780s, maybe even earlier, and established a salmon fishery on the Humber River, one of the most lucrative sources for salmon in all of western Newfoundland. After the salmon, you get many, many years later, a century later, the beginnings of a timber trade. And timber was awfully important. It was a winter resource. And one of the major problems with Newfoundland was to try and get enough resources through the year to keep people occupied, especially commercially. The lure of timber brought people in to harvest the timber for sale and for domestic purposes, timber for building wharves and stages and houses and so forth. It was a timber technology. Every place, a timber landscape, everything was built of wood. You have salmon and you have timber, and then you have the herring fishery in winter, and then of course you have the cod fishery, but that's out in the Bay of Islands. So you have these different resources being used at different times and sometimes simultaneously to build up settlement in what is today Brook and its curling and other areas.
Well, there's one class of men in this country that never is mentioned in song, and now since their trade is advancing, they'll come out on top before long. They say that our sailors have danger, and likewise our warriors bold, but there's none know the life of the driver but he suffers from hardship and cold. With your pickpoles and peavies and bateaux and all, and they're sure to drive out in the spring, that's the time, with their cogs and their boots as they get on the logs, and it's hard to get over their time. Billy Doherty, he is the manager, and he's a good man at the trade. And when he's around seeking drivers, he's like a train going down grade. But still, he's a man that's kind-hearted. On his word you can always depend. And there's never a man that works with him but likes to go with him again. With your pickpoles and peavies and bateaux and all, and they're sure to drive out in the spring, that's the time, with their cogs and their boots as they get on the logs, and it's hard to get over their time. Now the drive, it is just below Badger, and everything is working grand, with a jolly good crew of picked drivers and Ronald Kelly in command. For Ronald is boss on the river, and I'll tell you, he's a man that's alive. He once drove the wood of Victoria, now he's out on the main river drive. With your pickpoles and peavies and bateaux and all, and they're sure to drive out in the spring, that's the time, with their cogs and their boots as they get on the logs, and it's hard to get over their time. So now to conclude and to finish, and I hope that you all will agree in wishing to success to all Badger and the A&D Company. And long may they live for to flourish and continue to chop, drive and roll. And long may the business be managed by Mr. Doherty and Mr. Cole. With your pickpoles and peavies and bateaux and all, and they're sure to drive out in the spring, that's the time, with their cogs and their boots as they get on the logs, and it's hard to get over their time. In the early 1700s, the area around Deer Lake was a winter hunting ground for Montagnais Indians who traded in fur with the French. Their annual journeys south from the coast of Labrador can be retraced on a drive through the Bond Bay area in Gros National Park. The park is a showcase for the spectacular scenery along the Great Northern Peninsula and presents Newfoundland's unique geology at its best.
Well, Newfoundland is part of an ancient mountain system, a mountain belt known as the Appalachian Mountain Belt. And there was a time when that was linked to the Caledonian Mountain Belt, which runs through Britain and on to Norway and East Greenland. So Newfoundland is right in the middle of that old mountain system, if you like. What is unique about it is that we have all of the components of that system preserved in Newfoundland, and we have it preserved extremely well. So geologists can see exactly how this mountain system formed some 500 million years ago. Most apparent, most important, I suppose, is the west coast, say the Bond Bay area of Gros National Park, where you can see very distinct and unique rocks that are superbly exposed and are available to be studied, if you like. Also, there's interesting implications for the rest of the old mountain chain, if you like, the Appalachians. If we make a gold discovery here in Newfoundland, well, suddenly people in Ireland are very interested, and people in Norway are very interested about the geology. And the same thing applies for us. If a new type of deposit is found in Tennessee, for instance, then we say, well, we've got similar geology to Tennessee, and let's find out more about that and see if we can apply that to, say, Daniels Harbour in western Newfoundland.
For at least 4,000 years now, the Great Northern Peninsula has been home to traders, hunters, fishermen and their families. Archaeological digs at a site in Choix uncovered evidence of occupation here by the maritime Archaic Indians as early as 2200 BC. Archaeologist Priscilla Renouf has worked at the site for a number of years now.
Well, Choix is one of the best known archaeological areas on the island of Newfoundland. And it in fact is very well known archaeologically throughout North America. Choix is a very productive area for fish and sea mammals, less so for land animals. And what you have is evidence of human occupation from about 4,000 years ago right up through to the present. What put Choix on the map archaeologically was the oldest occupation there, and that is the maritime Archaic Indian occupation. In 1967, Jim Tuck of Memorial University of Newfoundland was called in when a number of skeletons were revealed in the basement. I think they were building a theater, actually, in the center of town. So he came back the following year, and through determined testing, he located the whole of the maritime Archaic Indian cemetery.
This is the adult female burial, and here you can see the idea of the personal belongings buried with the female to take with her into the next life. These were thought to be a very superstitious people, and they definitely believed in an afterworld or another life. Here we have some various artifacts, some of the more interesting artifacts that were discovered here in Choix. There were altogether well over 50,000 uncovered with just the 111 burials.
The artifacts and remains of the maritime Archaic Indians discovered at the site here in Choix indicate that they lived their lives much like the later indigenous and European settlers. A typical season would include a winter camp to hunt the caribou, seals in the spring and a salmon fishery in the summer.
I think the emphasis is not on survival, but it's on success. These prehistoric Indian and Eskimo groups were not just surviving, they were living very successfully off the resources of Newfoundland.
Long after the indigenous people left the area, the French operated a summer cod fishery here, using Choix as their main fishing station. Competition for the rich marine resource by English settlers along the shore resulted in territorial disputes between the two colonial powers. The various treaties between the French and English concerning fishing rights along the so-called French shore created a lot of difficulty for any potential settlers to the west coast of Newfoundland. There were as many interpretations to the treaties as there were species of fish in the waters along the coast here. Newfoundland became a colony of Britain officially in 1855, but it took another 50 years or so to finally resolve the problems created by the French shore treaties. Despite the colonial rivalries, however, the west coast of Newfoundland from Basque to St. Anthony and beyond was well and truly settled by the turn of the 20th century. Over 500 years before Jacques Cartier christened the harbour at St. Anthony, the area of the Straits of Belle Isle played host to the first known Europeans to set foot in North America. The history of European settlement in Newfoundland began at the turn of the 11th century when a group of Norwegian Vikings made their way in an open boat from Greenland to what is now called Meadows here at the tip of the Great Northern Peninsula. The Viking sagas tell of a number of journeys by Norwegians to these shores, beginning with Leif Erikson's voyage around the year 1000. The reconstructed settlement here provides a rare opportunity for reflection on the way of life of these ancient mariners. With very few exceptions, the established communities along Newfoundland's coastline have their origins in the fishery, with the sea providing the only link to trade and neighbours. Most of these once isolated communities, like Trout River in the Bombay area, are now accessible by road. In the late 1820s, a young man from Dorset, England, George Crocker, married a girl of Dorset descent, set up a fisheries here and so established the community of Trout River. I'm sure the natural beauty of the area played no small part in Mr. Crocker's decision to stay here in Newfoundland.
Well, Trout River is fairly typical of many East Coast settlements in the sense that a single family dominated. The first man came there early in the 19th century, the first decade or thereabouts, and he married, had several sons. These sons in turn built houses, took parts of their father's properties, and they in turn married other girls from the region, from the west coast, and established families, so that within 2 or 3 generations you had 10 or 15 families of Crockers, all descended from a single progenitor, single man. And that was fairly typical. The Dorset pool, especially pool connection was important in the early settling of the west coast of Newfoundland. Dorset was important.
The settlers brought with them memories of families and friends and of course the communities they left behind to start a new life in a new land. So much of their past remains in the stories and songs that they also brought with them from the old country.
Oh, come all brother tradesmen who travel along. Oh, pray come and tell me where the trade is all gone. Long time have I traveled and I cannot find none, and sing all the hard times of old England. In old England, very hard times. You will see the poor tradesmen walking the streets from morning till night for employment to seek, and scarce have they got any shoes on their feet, and sing all the hard times of old England. In old England, very hard times. Our soldiers and sailors have just come from war, been fighting for Queen and for country this year. Come home to be starved, better stayed where they were, and sing all the hard times of old England. In old England, very hard times. And now to conclude and to finish my song, let us hope that these hard times, they will not last long. I hope soon to have occasion to alter my song and sing all the good times of old England. In old England, jolly good times, and sing all the good times of old England. In old England, jolly good times.
Fogo, Twillingate, Morton's Harbour. Names I heard in Toronto for the first time shortly after I arrived from Ireland. My first exposure to Newfoundland music was through Irish musicians who travelled here and brought these new songs back with them. The words of the songs and the place names hold much more significance for me now that I've had the opportunity to follow the songs home. This is Twillingate. Compared to Western Newfoundland, permanent settlement by Europeans began about 200 years earlier along the coastline east of the Great Northern Peninsula. By the late 1600s, at least 3,000 people occupied some 30 settlements from Trepassey to Bonavista Bay, the so-called English shore. The pioneer population, however, for at least 200 years was quite small compared to the seasonal and temporary residents. Every spring, hundreds of ships and thousands of young men came to Newfoundland to work at the summer cod fishery. The people who came to work at the fisheries and eventually settled in the bays and islands of Newfoundland's east coast were mostly from England and Ireland. They came from Dorset and Devon in the southwest of England and the Waterford-Wexford area of Ireland's southeast coast. The young men who were recruited into the English West Country fishing enterprise, and to a lesser extent by Irish fish merchants, were part of the largest known migratory fishery in the Western world. Because of these adventurous young men, and later the young women, Shakespeare's English and fragments of the Celtic language can still be heard in conversations around Trinity and along the coast of Newfoundland. For most of these young people, a season or two at the Newfoundland fishery was an opportunity for cash and adventure.
They were indentured, they had contracts, but it was basically a free migration. These people were perfectly free to go back home or to settle in Trinity or in Virons and build up their homes there, and that's actually what happened.
Beneath the haloed moon, he stands alone, framed against the stars, and the harbour held reflections of the buildings and the bars. As the ship sailed through the narrows towards the ocean's endless reach, looking for a harbour like driftwood on a beach. Driftwood comes in with the tide and goes out with another, to search the endless seas to find a sister or brother. It comes from we know not whence or where it's trying to reach. Just like you and me is this driftwood on the beach. And out in the fading light, the rain falls down upon a shining street, where the homeless and the hungry will be on their midnight beat. Their fate remains of no concern to those they do besiege. They're homeless wanderers like driftwood on a beach. Driftwood comes in with the tide and goes out with another, to search the endless seas to find a sister or brother. It comes from we know not whence or where it's trying to reach. Just like you and me is its driftwood on a beach. And I will not believe that we are all in some kind of jail, from which there is no parole, no earthly bonded bail. Because freedom was the lesson that our fathers tried to teach, free to come and go like driftwood on a beach. Driftwood comes in with the tide and goes out with another, to search the endless seas to find a sister or brother. It comes from we know not whence or where it's trying to reach. Just like you and me is this driftwood on a beach. just like you and me, is driftwood on a beach.
Travelling the island as a musician presented me with an opportunity to learn about Newfoundland's long association with the countries of Western Europe. In places like Trinity and here in Bonavista, the tentative steps of the pioneer settlers can still be traced with very little effort. By the first half of the 19th century, Newfoundland's resident population had increased considerably, while the massive migratory fishery began its decline. The traditional wage-earning indentured servants from Ireland and England were replaced by local hired hands who were rewarded for their toil with a share of the catch. Since the turn of the century, Newfoundland, like the rest of the world, has undergone many profound changes. The construction of the Air Force bases at Gander, Stephenville and Goose Bay during the European conflict presented opportunities for employment and diversification. The problems of the French Shore Treaty, which hampered development for so long, were also resolved at the turn of the century, helping to focus attention on Newfoundland's other resources like mining, forestry and agriculture. A further change in Newfoundland society was to occur in 1949, when the former British colony with its territory in Labrador became the 10th province in the Dominion of Canada. Many of the changes being experienced in Newfoundland are more apparent in the larger communities. Marystown, like other large centres, reflects these new developments as they occur. The shipyard here at Marystown is a first-class facility for the repair, servicing and construction of larger vessels. Newfoundland's long-standing relationship with the sea continues to grow in importance for the fishery, shipping and more recently in the search for offshore oil. It's encouraging to note that music still has a role to play in reflecting the changing times. How hardy are we who work out on the rigs, where the seas they do roll and the waves are so big, blow high and blow low, the wind they do roar. There's no job on earth like one working offshore. A, the Atlantic, the earth's largest well. B for the ballast and the boys in the bell. C for the chopper that brought us out here. And D is the danger that lurks everywhere. So hardy are we who work out on the rig, where the seas they do roll and the waves are so big, blow high and blow low, the wind they do roar. There's no job on earth like one working offshore. E for the engine room, F for the flange, G for the Grand Banks just off Newfoundland, also for the galley where the grub is so good, and H is for home where we'd stay if we could. So hardy are we.
If you're working in any other industry, say in land, you work your 8 hours, your 12 hours, whatever, and you go home to your family. With a rig, you live together. You know, you're not only working 12 hours, you stay together for 3 weeks at a time.
I for the icebergs come drifting down through. J is the job that we're out here to do. K for the knowledge that built this damn thing. And L is for lifting what the supply boats bring. So hardy are we who work out on the rigs, where the seas they do roll and the waves are so big, blow high or blow low, the wind that do roar. There's no job on earth like one working offshore. If you turn down any by-road on this section of the Trans-Canada Highway, you'll reach one of the large bays of the Avalon Peninsula.
To the north, it's Trinity Bay and Conception Bay, and to the south, it's Placentia Bay and St. Mary's Bay.
There's so much more to Newfoundland than can be experienced on one journey across the island. The history of the Avalon Peninsula alone is crowded with tales of marauding French troops, pirates and princesses, and solitary triumphs by pioneer families on the coast. There were good tidings too. The first telegraph cable linking Europe with North America was landed here at Heart's Content in Trinity Bay, and aviation history was made by the many transatlantic flights from Harbour Grace in Conception Bay. When Sir Humphrey Gilbert claimed Newfoundland on behalf of Elizabeth I in 1583, his audience consisted of Basque and Portuguese fishermen who had been using the harbour as a summer fishing station for a number of years before his arrival. The harbour at St. John's is really the heart of the city. Sheltered by the surrounding hills, St. John's has offered protection and rest for seafarers down through the centuries. Like the city around it, the harbour has changed with the times. Gone are the finger piers built to accommodate the smaller traders and fishing schooners of the last and previous centuries.
One of the best memories of growing up in the East End was at times when there'd be a hurricane warning and all the ships from all the different countries would seek refuge in the harbour. It was pretty exciting, especially the White Fleet, the Portuguese White Fleet. There'd be maybe two and three, maybe four abreast. Yeah, so it was a lot of fun. I come here quite a bit. I think it's the most attractive area in the city. The fact that you can walk around the trails and down by the water, it's kind of inspiring.
Yeah.
Down by the Narrows, down on the rocks, the gulls frequent. Yeah, you can almost, it looks as though you can almost touch the ships as they go by.
Oh, the harbour lights are gleaming, and the evening still and dark, and the seagulls are all dreaming, seagull dreams on amorous park, and the mist is slowly drifting as the storefront lights go dim, and the moon is gently lifting, and the last ships coming in. All the sailors tell you stories, some are true and some are false, but they're always wrecked, and they're up on the deck, and they're dancing the St. John's waltz. Oh, we've had our share of history, we've seen nations come and go. There've been battles raged o'er land and stage, 200 years or more. For glory or for freedom, or for country, or for king, or for money or fame, but there are no names on the graves when the men lie sleeping. All the 9 to 5 survive the day with a sigh and a dose of salt, and they're parking their cars, and they're packing the bars, and they're dancing the St. John's waltz. Oh, my heart's upon the highway, and I'm sold on going to sea. All the planes fill up the skyway, and the trains run swift and free. Leave the wayward free to wander, leave the restless free to roam. If it's rocks in the be dancing the St. John's waltz.
During my first week performing in Newfoundland, I was brought up here to Signal Hill. Mind you, it was 2 a.m. and windy, but I wasn't paying too much attention to that. It was quite a dramatic introduction to St. John's for me then, the expanse of the city, the lights, and of course the friendly strangers. St. John's has become as familiar to me now as was my native Dublin on the day I left. The city of St. John's crowds around the harbour that gave it birth. The harbour continues to be a dominant feature of the city's personality. Reflections of the old world are in evidence along the waterfront and in the downtown commercial area. In recent years, ocean traffic to and from this old city has become more international than in the days of the European cod fishery. The presence of Russian, German or Japanese vessels, to name but a few, is quite commonplace in the harbour at St. John's. St. John's bears little resemblance to Dublin in a physical sense, but the mood of the city and the people made it easy for me to settle here in Newfoundland nearly 20 years ago. It's not very difficult to identify Newfoundland's strong cultural ties with Ireland. Along with place names and family names, the music to me will always be the strongest link. Like myself, Chris Hennessy arrived here from Ireland, unaware of the historical connection between the two islands.
When I came here, I was greatly surprised to find the great amount of Irish influence that I found here in the language and the accents and the expressions of the people and in the faces of the people. Some of the older parts of St. John's remind me of some of the older parts of Cork City, which of course is like St. John's, is changing very rapidly, as indeed are all, I think, the great old places of the world. Back in 1899, everybody sang Old Lang Syne. 100 years would take a long, long time for every little boy and girl. Now there's only one thing that I'd like to know. Where did the 20th century go? I swear that it was there just a minute ago. All over this world, all over this world, all over this world. The 20th century is almost over, all over this world. Does anybody recall the Great Depression? I read all about it in the True Confession. I'm sorry that I was late for the recording session, but somebody put me on hold. And did anybody see them linoleum floors, petroleum jelly or 2 world wars? They all went around in revolving doors, all over this world, all over this world, all over this world. The 20th century is almost over, all over this world. Old Father Time is a rumbling and a rapping, standing at the window, a thumping and a tapping, and everybody's waiting for something to happen. I hope it doesn't happen to you. You know the judgment day is a-getting nearer. There it goes in my rear view mirror. If you duck down, I could see a little clearer. All over this world, all over this world, all over
I hope to join in a chorus of Old Lang Syne as Newfoundland enters the 21st century. My wish will be for Newfoundland's continued prosperity and that the spirit of the first young settlers will live on in the music that brought me here to stay. Spending their first winter in Newfoundland and deciding to stay reflects the courage and determination of the first European settlers to these shores. Coming as they did from the softer climes of Ireland, England and France, the sadness of emigration must have lingered for a while. Perhaps to some, the Newfoundland winter was a welcome distraction from the heavy burden of history they left behind in the old country. To others, like myself, settling here was an introduction to a new world to explore and to a part of myself I never knew until I came to Newfoundland.